Morning, babies. Well, it is Friday morning, March 27th, and we've been doing this for a few days now. Hope everybody's doing okay. I miss you all, miss those faces. A lot of you are doing really, really super on handing in your questions and reflecting. And I'm really proud of you. I know I had heard yesterday that some of you are way overwhelmed with more homework than usual, which is odd and crazy in itself. I guess the only thing I can say is take things in little chunks. Don't panic. Do the best you can. Make sure you're getting sleep, you're eating, taking care of yourself. Taking things in little chunks will help immensely. Um, So today I'm going to read chapters 16 and 17. We're going into the trial. And things are going to start to get a little bit hinky and uncomfortable. Things are going to start connecting to the Scottsboro trials. You remember what I had said when we were talking about the Great Depression? We were talking about the Dust Bowl, the dust ammonia, recession. And I said, man, we are so lucky because we have never had to go through something like this. Guess what? Yeah, we're not coated in dust, but we are fighting another illness that I hope none of my babies acquire. So I respect and appreciate all of you. I will be putting grades into the grade book for starting the second quarter here this weekend. Just keep sending me your stuff and everything will be okay. That's that saying, you know that I usually have the rule of no late work. Well, obviously that is a moot point now because we're in a virtual classroom. It's like we're in an online class. So, what I think you need to remember is to stay on top of your stuff, but because the best thing to do is if you're letting me read to you and you're jotting down notes, then go ahead and work on those questions because it's fresh in your mind. Then you can go back and do the front and reflect, predict, make connections, and then you can send it to me. I don't want you to procrastinate, but I don't want you to think it has to be if we do like our class would be, I've got 2 black days and 1 gold day, so that would be staggered all over. But we're going to stay with reading about 4 chapters a week, which coincides with our study guide, our sourcing pages. So do your best, and I hope that my reading is okay and that you're getting what you need. So yeah. So today we're going to take on the trial, start going into it. 16 and 17. Scout and Jim have never been to a trial, so this is a whole new experience for them. Grab your trial booklet. See, I told you we made these, and now you have them so you can take notes. So this, and it's actually worth quite a few points. This will help you segment everybody's testimony. So it's like you're a juror at the trial taking down the facts. Okay, so today we get into Hectate's testimony. Heck is first. So you have facts established. We should find 4 facts, and we'll talk through it. 4 facts that you can write down, 1 fact in each box. Then on the right-hand side, what do the facts imply? What's the message that we can take that are being input? Not what we infer, but what Heck is implying or Bob Ewell is implying. We're going to get a real taste of the Ewells, the Ewells, and you're going to see what kind of person. We're going to talk about some things, and it's going to blow your mind. Okay? So I will stop as we go, okay? And we'll get things jotted down. Capiche? Cool. Capiche. All right. So grab your books, grab your trial booklet, grab your handout, grab yourself. I don't care. No, I do care. Don't do that. Ew. Okay. So we're going to start on 16. And I don't know if you can see it. I have my To Kill a Mockingbird coffee mug. I've got that ready to go. Of course, I've got my coffee. Me without my coffee? What are you saying? Who are you people? Do you not know me? Okay. Yeah, you haven't gotten away from my weirdness yet. Okay, so here we go. Chapter 16. Jim heard me. He thrust his head over around the connecting door, and as he came to my bed, Atticus's light flashed on. We stayed where we were until it went off, and we heard him turn over, and we waited till he was still again. Jim took me to his room, and he put me in bed beside him. Try to go to sleep, he said. It'll all be over after tomorrow. Maybe. Remember, they'd just gotten back from dealing with townfolk that might have lynched him, and hurt Atticus. But they didn't. We had come in quietly so as not to wake Auntie. Atticus killed the engine in the driveway and coasted to the car house. We went in the back door and to our rooms without a word. I was very tired and I was drifting into sleep when the memory of Atticus calmly folding his newspaper and pushing back his hat became Atticus standing in the middle of an empty waiting street, pushing up his glasses. The full meaning of the night's events hit me and I began crying. Jim was awfully nice about it for once. He didn't remind me that people nearly 9 years old didn't do things like that. Everybody's appetite was delicate this morning, except Jim's. He ate his way through 3 eggs. Atticus watched in frank admiration. Aunt Alexandra sipped coffee and radiated waves of disapproval. Children who slipped out at night were a disgrace to the family. When isn't something a disgrace to the family in her eyes? Atticus said he was right glad his disgraces had come along. But Auntie said, nonsense. Mr. Underwood was there all the time. You know, it's a funny thing about Braxton, said Atticus. He despises Negroes and he won't have one near him. Isn't that interesting? He says, Mr. Braxton Underwood of the Macon Tribune says he despises them, but he was protecting Tom. So Braxton Underwood has been raised in a racist environment, but that doesn't necessarily, and he may have essences of it. We all have essences of things at times, but he did not, his humanity took over. It came first. Okay. Local opinion held Mr. Underwood to be an intense, profane little man, whose father, in a funny fit of humor, Christian Braxton bragged, a name Mr. Underwood had done his best to live down. Atticus said naming people after Confederate generals made slow, steady drinkers. Calpurnia was serving Aunt Alexandra more coffee, and she shook her head at what I thought was a pleading, winning look. You're still too little, She said, I'll tell you when you ain't. There's the old myth that drinking coffee stunts your growth. Well, they say that's a myth. I certainly hope so. Nah, I'm still drinking my coffee. Black like my soul. Okay. So you're still too little, she said. I'll tell you when you ain't. I said, it might help my stomach. All right, she said, and she got a cup from the sideboard. She poured 1 tablespoon of coffee into it, and she filled the cup to the brim with milk. So it's a cup of milk with a tad of coffee. I thanked her by sticking out my tongue at it, and I looked up to catch Auntie's warning frown, but she was frowning at Atticus. She waited until Calpurnia was in the kitchen, and then she said, don't talk like that in front of them. Talk like what in front of whom? He asked. Like that, in front of Calpurnia. You said Braxton Underwood despises Negroes right in front of her. Well, I'm sure Cal knows it. Everybody in Macomb knows it. I was beginning to notice subtle changes in my father these days, and that came out when he talked with Aunt Alexandra. It was a quiet digging in. Never outright irritation. Oh, I think Atticus is highly irritated with his sister. I think she's annoying the living tar out of him. But he's holding it. He's being respectful. There was a faint starchiness in his voice when he said, anything that's fit to say at this table is fit to say to Calpurnia. You know what she means to this family. Well, I don't think it's a good habit, Atticus. It encourages them. You know how they talk among themselves. Ugh, everything that happens out of this town's out to the quarters before sundown. My father put down his knife. I don't know of any law that says they can't talk. Maybe if we didn't give them so much to talk about, they'd be quiet. Why don't you drink your coffee, Scout? I was playing in it with a spoon. Well, I thought Mr. Cunningham was a friend of ours. You told me a long time ago he was. He still is. But last night he wanted to hurt you. Atticus placed his fork beside his knife and he pushed his plate aside. Mr. Cunningham's basically a good man. He said he just has his blind spots along with the rest of us. Jim spoke. Don't call that a blind spot. He'd have killed you last night when he first went there. He might have hurt me a little, Atticus conceded, but son, you have to understand. You'll understand folks a little bit better when you're older. A mob's always made up of people, no matter what. Now, Mr. Cunningham was part of a mob last night, but he was still a man. And every mob and every little southern town is always made up of people you know. Doesn't say much for him, though, right? I'll say not, said Jim. So it took an 8-year-old child to bring them to their senses, didn't it? Said Atticus. Well, that proves something that a gang of wild animals can be stopped simply because they're still human. Maybe we need a police force of children. You children last night made Walter Cunningham stand in my shoes for a minute. That was enough. Well, I hope Jim would understand folks a little better when he was older. I wouldn't. First day Walter comes back to school will be his last, I affirmed. You will not touch him, Atticus said flatly. I don't want either of you bearing a grudge about this thing, no matter what happens. You see, don't you? Said Aunt Alexandra. What comes of things like this, don't say I haven't told you. Atticus said he'd never say that. He pushed his chair and he got up. Well, there's a day ahead, so excuse me. Jim, I don't want you or Scout downtown today, please. As Atticus departed, Dill came bounding down the hall into the dining room. It's all over town this morning, he announced, all about how we held off 100 folks with our bare hands. Aunt Alexandra stared him to silence. It was not 100 people, she said, and nobody held anybody off. It was just a nest of those Cunninghams, drunk and disorderly. Oh, Auntie, that's just Dill's way, said Jim. He signaled them to follow him. You all stay in the yard today, she said as we made our way to the front porch. It it was like Saturday. People from the south end of the county passed our house in a leisurely but steady stream. So imagine their quiet street past the Radley house, people pouring into town, just like in the Scottsboro trials, people pouring in to watch this man on trial. Kadoki. Mr. Dolphus Raymond lurched by on his thoroughbred. I don't see how he stays in the saddle, murmured Jim. How can you stand to get drunk before 8 in the morning? Hmm. A wagon load of ladies rattled past us. They wore cotton sunbonnets and dresses with long sleeves. A bearded man in a wool hat drove them. Yonder's the Mennonites, Jim said to Dale. They don't have buttons. They lived deep in the woods, did most of their trading across the river, and rarely came to Macon. Dale was interested. They've all got blue eyes, Jim explained, and men can't shave after they marry. Their wives like for 'em to tickle 'em with their beards. Mennonites are an offshoot, and Hutterites are an offshoot of the Amish. And we have Hutterite colonies, and we have the Mennonites down in Freeman. Mr. X. Billups rode by on a mule and waved to us. He's a funny man, said Jim. X is his name, not his initial. He was in court one time and they asked him his name, and he said X. Billups. And the clerk asked him to spell it, and he said X. And asked him again, and he said X. They kept at it until he wrote X on a sheet of paper and he held it up for everybody to see. And they asked where he got his name, and he said that's the way his folks signed him up when he was born. Why would they file his name as X? What parent names his kid X? A set of parents that don't know how to read. We call that being illiterate. Illiterate means that you have a third grade or about a third grade reading ability. Illiterate means you don't know how to read at all. Zip doodah. Okay? As the county went by us, Jim gave Dill the histories and the general attitudes of the more prominent figures. So Jim is actually kind of being a Miss Stephanie Crawford at the moment. He seems to know everything about everybody, and he's not catching himself. Mr. Tensaw Jones voted the straight prohibition ticket. Miss Emily Davis dipped snuff in private. Mr. Byron Waller could play the violin, and Mr. Jack Slade was cutting his third set of teeth. Now a wagon load of unusually stern-faced citizens appeared. When they pointed to Miss Maudie Atkinson's yard, ablaze with summer flowers, Miss Maudie herself came out on the porch. There was an odd thing about Miss Maudie. On her porch, she was too far away for us to see her features clearly, but we could always catch her mood by the way she stood. She was now standing, her arms akimbo, her shoulders dropping a little, her head cocked to one side, and her glasses winking in the sunlight. We knew she wore a grin of the utmost wickedness. The driver of the wagon slowed down his mules, and a shrill-voiced woman called out, He that cometh in vanity departeth in darkness. And Miss Maudie answered, A merry heart maketh a cheerful countenance. I guessed that the foot washers thought that the devil was quoting scripture for his own purposes. So the driver speeded his mules. Excuse me. Bless me. Okay. When they objected to Miss Maudie's yard, why they objected to Miss Maudie's yard was a mystery. Heightened in my mind because for someone who spent all the daylight hours outdoors, Miss Maudie's command of the scriptures were formidable. You going to court this morning? Asked Jim. We strolled over. I am not, she said. I've no business with the court this morning. Well, aren't you going to go down and watch? Asked Dill. I am not. It's morbid. Watching a poor devil on trial for his life. Look at all those folks. It's like a Roman carnival. Well, they have to try 'em in public, Miss Maudie, I said. It wouldn't be right if they didn't. I'm quite aware of that, she said. Just because it's public, I don't have to go, do I? Miss Stephanie Crawford came by. She wore a hat and gloves. Mm-hmm. She said, You just look at all this, folks. Oh, you'd think that William Jennings Bryan was speaking. And where are you going, Stephanie? Inquired Miss Maudie. To the Jitney Jungle. Miss Maudie said she had never seen Miss Stephanie go to the Jitney Jungle in a hat in her life. Well, said Miss Stephanie, I thought I might just look up at the courthouse, see what Atticus is up to. Better be careful he doesn't hand you a subpoena. Now, we asked Miss Maudie to elucidate. She said Miss Stephanie seemed so much to know so much about the case, she might as well be called on to testify. Well, we held off until noon, and when Atticus came home to dinner and said they'd spent the morning picking the jury. And after dinner, we stopped by for Dill and we went to town. Oh, it was a gala occasion. There was no room at the public kitchen rail for another animal. Mules and wagons were parked under every available tree, and the courthouse square was covered with picnic parties, sitting on newspapers, washing down biscuit and syrup with warm milk from fruit jars. Oh, some people were gnawing on cold chicken and cold fried pork chops. The more affluent chased their food with drugstore Coca-Cola and bulb-shaped soda glasses. Greasy-faced children popped the whip through the crowd, and babies lunched at their mothers' breasts. In a far corner of the square, the Negroes sat quietly in the sun, dining on sardines and crackers and the more vivid flavors of knee-high cola. And Mr. Dolphus Raymond sat with them. Jim, said Dill, he's drinking out of a sack. So, what can we infer if we see someone drinking from a bottle that's covered in a paper bag? That's right. Some alcohol. Got some alcohol in that bag. Okay. Well, Mr. Dolphus Raymond seemed to be so doing. Two yellow drugstore straws ran from his mouth to the depths of a brown paper bag. I ain't ever seen anybody do that, murmured Dill. How does he keep what's in it in it? Jim giggled. He's got a Coca-Cola bottle full of whiskey in there. There's not so not to upset the ladies. You'll see him sip it all afternoon. He'll step out for a while and he'll fill it back up. Why is he sitting with the colored folks? Always does. He likes them better than he likes us, I reckon. Lives by himself way down near the county line, and he's got a colored woman and all sorts of children. I'll show you some of them if we see him. Huh. He doesn't look like trash, said Dill. Oh, he's not. He owns all one side of the riverbank down there, and he's from an real old family to boot. Then why does he do like that? That's just his way, said Jim. They say he never got over his wedding. He was supposed to marry one of the spender ladies, and I think they were going to have a huge wedding, but they didn't. And after the rehearsal, the bride went upstairs, blew her head off, shotgun, pulled the trigger with her toes. Anybody ever know why? No, said Jim. Nobody ever quite knew why but Mr. Dolphus. And they said it was because she found out about his colored woman and he reckoned he could keep her and get married too. He's been sort of drunk ever since. You know, though, he's real good to those children. Jim, I asked, what's a mixed child? Half white, half colored. You've seen him, Scout. You know the red, kinky haired one that delivers from the drugstore? He's half white. They're real sad. Sad? How come? They don't belong anywhere. Colored folks won't have them because they're half white, and white folks won't have them because they're colored. So they're just in betweens. They don't belong anywhere. But Mr. Dolphus, now, they say he shipped two of his up north, but they don't mind him up north. Yonder's one of them. Believe it or not, there is still, even though it is so much more common and open minded nowadays, But there are still individuals that believe that races shouldn't cross lines, that religion shouldn't cross lines. Catholics should marry a Catholic, Jews should marry a Jew, Black should be with Black, Asian should be with Asian, um, white should be with white. Yeah, a lot of closed mindedness. Not about love and respect and humanity, but back to judging by the color of your skin. Ridiculous? It is. It is. Um, so let this roll around in your head. Mr. Dolphus. Jem tells the story about him and his bride. So it kind of sounds like a Dill story. How much truth do you think is in that? Um, why does he decide to hang, spend time, live his life with the African Americans than with the people of Macomb? He owns a lot of land. Dill makes a uneducated comment about, well, he doesn't look like trash. Well, we know what trash is. Trash transcends caste systems and colors. Trash is someone who takes and takes and takes, does not think about humanity, cares nothing for except for themselves, narcissistic, cold-hearted, closed-minded. So do you think Dolphus is that way? Or is there more to this story than we know and it's just gossip that's being passed down? Okay? Let that roll around in your head. Capiche? Caposh. Okay? And unfortunately, the whole idea, Harper Lee's not wrong with mixed children. It still happens. We have it happen out on the Indian reservations. There are Native Americans American Indians who will choose to stay out on the reservations. There are some that go and they want to go to college, university, go back and try to help the families on the reservations. But then they get looked down at too because they left to go to the white man's schooling. And then you have those who totally left. But often children of mixed cultures and ethnicities will get sidelined. Maybe not all the time, but I guarantee you, I will bet you $100. That's how much information is out there and studies that have been done. And I've heard it from people's mouths, copious amounts of time, that kids that get berated, bullied because they don't fit in anywhere because of their skin color or the mixture of the cultures. Well, guess what, people? Unless you're an indigenous, Native American, American Indian, we are made up of immigrants. That's what it is. I got a lot of Scottish, Irish, British. I got some German. I got German Jew. Yeah, I got Danish. There's a mix. That's who we are. That's how we as Americans embrace all the different traditions. St. Patty's Day, whether you're Irish or not, and Christmas, whether you're Christian or not. I mean, there are so many traditions and foods and elements that we mix in together because that's who we are. As humanitarians, we should embrace those. We should learn about those. We should care about those. We should want to learn more about different people. When you learn about people, your mind becomes a little more open. When your mind becomes open, your heart comes open. When your heart comes open, you become a humanitarian. It's a concept, I know. but it's one you need to learn now. Okay. All right. Continuing on. Okay. A small boy clutching a Negro woman's hand walked toward us. He looked all Negro to me. He was rich chocolate with flaring nostrils and beautiful teeth. And sometimes he'd skip happily, and the Negro woman tugged his hand to make him stop. And Jim waited until he passed us. That's one of them little ones, he said. How can you tell? Asked Dale. He looked black to me. Well, you can't sometimes, not unless you know who they are. But he's half Raymond, all right. But how can you tell? I asked. I told you, Scott, you just have to know who they are. Well, how do we know we ain't Negro? Well, Uncle Jack Finch says we really don't know. He says as far as he can trace the Finches, we ain't. But for all he knows, we might have come straight out of Ethiopia during the Old Testament. Well, if it came out during the Old Testament, it's too long ago to matter. And there it is. Well, that's what I thought, said Jim. But around here, once you have a drop of Negro blood, that makes you all black. Hey, look! Some invisible signal had made the lunchers on the square rise and scatter bits of newspaper and cellophane and wrapping paper. Children came to mothers, and babies were cradled on hips as men in sweat-stained hats collected their families and herded them through the courthouse doors. And in the far corner of the square, the Negroes and Mr. Dolphus Raymond stood up and dusted their breeches. There were a few women and children among them, which seemed to dispel the holiday mood, and they waited patiently at the doors behind the white families. In other place, you wait until the white folks go in, and then you can go in. Yeah. Let's go in, said Dale. Nah, we better wait till they get in. Atticus might not like it if he sees us, said Jim. Now, the Macomb County Courthouse was faintly reminiscent of Arlington in one respect. Remember to the documentary of the Scottsboro trials? The town square and courthouse was very, very much the way it is in Macomb, in Monroeville. The concrete pillars supporting its south roof were too heavy for their light burden, and the pillars were all that remained standing from an original courthouse burned in 1856. Another courthouse was built around then. It's better to say built in spite of them. But for the south porch, the Macomb County Courthouse was early Victorian, presenting an unoffensive vista when seen from the north. Now, from the other side, however, Greek revival columns clashed with a big 19th century clock tower housing a rusty, unreliable instrument, a few indicating a people determined to preserve every physical scrap of the past. Now, to reach the courtroom on the second floor, one passed sundry sunless county cubbyholes, the tax assessor, the tax collector of the county clerk, the county solicitor, the circuit clerk, the judge of probate. They all lived in cool, dim hutches that smelled of decaying record books mingled with old damp cement and stale urine. It was necessary to turn on the lights in the daytime. There was always a film of dust on the rough floorboards. Now, the inhabitants of these offices were creatures of their environments. Little gray-faced men, they seemed untouched by wind or sun. Well, we knew there was a crowd, but we had not bargained for the multitudes in the first floor hallway. Now, I got separated from Jim and Dill, but I made my way toward the wall by the stairwell, knowing that Jim would come for me eventually. I found myself in the middle of the Idlers Club, and I made myself as unobtrusive as possible. Now, this was a group of white shirt, khaki trousered, suspendered old men who had spent their lives doing nothing. They had money. Excuse me. And passed their twilight days doing the same on pine benches under the live oaks on the square. Attentive critics of the courthouse business, Atticus said they knew as much law as the Chief Justice from long years of observation. Normally, they were the court's only spectators, and today they seem resentful of the interruption of their comfortable routine. And when they spoke, their voices sounded casually important. The conversation was about my father. Well, he thinks he knows what he's doing, one said. Oh, no, I wouldn't say that, said another. Atticus Finch is a deep reader. He's a mighty deep reader. Oh, he reads all right. That's all he does. And the club snickered. So these are old white men past the age of 75 with money. And they just, so you know that they have the racist blood deep and wide, and they know everything, and we know nothing. Let me tell you something now, Billy, a third said. You know the court appointed him to defend this nigger. Yeah, but Atticus aims to defend him. That's what I don't like about it. Now, this was news. News that put a different light on things. Atticus had to, whether he wanted to or not. I thought it odd that he hadn't said to us anything about it. We could have used it many times in defending him and ourselves. He had to. That's why he was doing it. Huh. He had to equaled fewer fights and less fussing. But did that explain the town's attitude? Did Atticus really have to? He was told by Judge Taylor, his friend, to do it. Probably because he would be fair. Stella Ann. Okay. So here's Stella. I promised you Stella. She's been sleeping. Yeah, she's bug-eyed, but I love her. She's goofy looking, but I love her. I don't judge you on the color of your eyes. No, I don't. I don't judge you on the color of your fur. I don't. I love you just the way you are. Are you my monkey? Cool. Don't bark. All right. All right. You want to be up here? You want to have your nose in the business, don't you? You like this story. Yeah. You've been hearing me read. Honey, you can't sit. No. Okay. Well, that puts a whole new perspective. Okay. We don't need to see your baby girl. I love you, but you got to get down, get funky. You're in the way. You don't care. All right. Moonshine. There we go. All right. Now, you sit right there. Okay. All righty. So he didn't have to. He could have pushed it, but Judge Taylor wanted Atticus to take this because he knew he was a good person. He knew he would be fair and he would do his damnedest. I said it, damnedest to save Tom Robinson's life. Okay. Sorry. But did that explain the town's attitude? The court appointed Atticus to defend him, and Atticus aimed to defend him. That's what they didn't like about it. And that was confusing. The Negroes, having waited for the white people to go upstairs, began to come in. Whoa, now, you just a minute, said a club member, holding up his walking stick. Don't just start up them stairs yet a while. Now, you have to remember, African Americans sit in the balcony. White folk get to sit on the bottom. In actuality, you're going to have a better view from above, but that's beside the point. Okay? The club began its stiff-jointed climb, and they ran into Dale and Jim on their way down looking for me. They squeezed past, and Jim called, Scout, come on, there's not a seat left. We have to stand up. Oh, look at there now, he said irritably as the black people surged upstairs. The old men ahead of them would take most of the standing room. We were out of luck, and it was all my fault, Jim informed me, and we stood miserably by the wall. Can't you all get in? Reverend Sykes was looking down at us with his black hat in his hand. Hey, Reverend, said Jim. No, Scout here messed us up. Well, let's see what we can do. Reverend Sykes was looking down. He edged his way upstairs, and in a few minutes he was back. Well, there's not a seat downstairs. Do y'all reckon it'll be all right if you come up to the balcony with me? Gosh, yes, said Jim. Happily, we sped ahead of Reverend Sykes to the courtroom floor. There, we went up a covered staircase and we waited at the door. Reverend Sykes came puffing behind us and steered us gently through the black people in the balcony. Four Negroes rose and gave us their front row seats. The colored balcony ran along three walls of the courtroom like a second story veranda, and from it we could see everything. Now, the jury sat to the left under long windows, and sunburned, lanky, they seemed to be all farmers. This was natural. Townsfolk rarely sat on juries. They were either struck or excused. One or two of the jury looked vaguely like dressed up Cunninghams, and at this stage they sat straight and alert. Can't use anybody in Macomb's a little town. You can't use anybody in Macomb because it's not going to be a fair trial. It's not going to be a fair trial no matter what, but that definitely would not help. The circuit solicitor and another man, Atticus and Tom Robinson, sat at the tables with their backs to us. There was a brown book and some yellow tablets on the solicitor's table, and Atticus's was bare. Now, just inside the railing that divided the spectators from the court, the witnesses sat on cowhide bottom chairs, and their backs were to us. Judge Taylor was on the bench looking like a sleepy old shark, his pilot fish ratting rapidly below in front of him. And Judge Taylor looked like most judges I had ever seen. Amiable, white-haired, slightly ruddy-faced. He was a man who ran his court with alarming informality. He sometimes propped his feet up. He often cleaned his fingernails with his pocket knife. Think back to the original judge with the Scottsboro Boys, the good judge, same kind of guy. In long equity hearings, especially after dinner, he gave the impression of dozing, an impression dispelled forever when a lawyer once deliberately pushed a pile of books to the floor in a desperate effort to wake him up. And without opening his eyes, Judge Taylor murmured, Mr. Whitley, you do that again and it'll cost you $100. He was a man learned in the law, and although he seemed to take his job casually, in reality he kept a firm grip on any proceedings that came before him. Only once was Judge Taylor ever seen at a dead standstill in open court, and the Cunninghams stopped him. Old Sarah, their stomping grounds there, was populated by two families separate and apart in the beginning, but unfortunately bearing the same name. Now, the Cunninghams married the Coninghams until the spelling of the names was academic. Academic until a Cunningham disputed a Coningham over land titles and took it to the law. Now, during a controversy of this character, James Cunningham testified that his mother spelled it Cunningham on deeds and things, but she was really a Coningham. She was an uncertain speller. She was a seldom reader, and she was given to looking far away sometimes when she sat in the front gallery in the evening. Now, after 9 hours of listening to the eccentricities of Old Sarum inhabitants, Judge Taylor threw the case out of court. Yeah, 9 hours he listened to them bicker. When asked upon what grounds, Judge Taylor said, Temptuous convivience, and he declared he hoped to God the litigants were satisfied by each having had their public say. They were, and that was all they wanted in the first place. They just wanted to come and complain about it. Judge Taylor had one interesting habit. He permitted smoking in his courtroom, but did not himself indulge. Sometimes, if one was lucky, one had the privilege of watching him put a long, dry cigar into his mouth and munch it slowly up. And bit by bit, that dead cigar would disappear to reappear hours later as a flat, slick mess. Its essence extracted and mingling with Judge Taylor's digestive juices. So basically, like, I once asked Atticus how Mrs. Taylor stood to kiss him, but Atticus said they didn't kiss much. The witness stand was to the right of Judge Taylor, and when we got to our seats, Heck Tate was already on it. Okay, there's chapter 16. Now we are going to be starting. We're going to be looking at Heck's testimony here and breaking it down. So stay strong with me, peeps. I got you. Jim, I said, are those the e-whales sitting down yonder? Hush, said Jim. Mr. Heck Tate's testifying. Now, Mr. Tate was dressed for the occasion. He wore an ordinary business suit, which made him look somehow like every other man. Gone were his high boots, his lumber jacket, and his bullet-studded belt. From that moment, he ceased to terrify me. He was sitting forward in the witness chair, his hands clasped between his knees, listening attentively to the circuit solicitor. Now, the solicitor, a Mr. Gilmer, was not well known to us. He was from Abbotsville, and we saw him only when court convened, and that rarely, for court was no special interest of Jem and me. A balding, smooth-faced man, he could have been anywhere between 40 and 60. And although his back was to us, we knew he had a slack cast in one of his eyes, which he used to his advantage. He seemed to be looking at a person when he was actually doing nothing of the kind. Thus, he was hell on juries and witnesses. Now, the jury, thinking themselves under close scrutiny, paid attention. So did the witnesses, thinking likewise. Now, in your own words, Mr. Tate, Mr. Gilmer would say. Well, said Mr. Tate, touching his glasses, speaking to his knees. I was called. Could you say that to the jury, Mr. Tate? Thank you. Who called you? Mr. Tate said, I was fetched by Mr. Bobby while yonder one night. What night, sir? Mr. Tate said, well, it was the November 21st, and I was just leaving my office to go home when Mr. Ewell came in, very excited he was, and said get out to his house quick. Some niggard raped his girl. Did you go? Well, certainly I got in the car and I went out as fast as I could. And what did you find? Well, I found her lying on the floor in the middle of the front room, one on the right as you go in. She was pretty well beat up, but I heaved her to her feet and she washed her face in the bucket corner and said she was all right. And I asked who hurt her, and she said it was Tom Robinson. Now, Judge Taylor, who had been concentrating on his fingernails, looked up as if he was expecting an objection, but Atticus was quiet. And asked her if he beat her like that, and she said yes, he had. And asked if he took advantage of her, and she said yes, he did. So I went down to Robinson's house and I brought him back, and she identified him as the one, so I took him in, and that's all there was to it. Thank you, said Mr. Gilmer. Judge Taylor said, any questions, Atticus? Yes, said my father. He was sitting behind the table. His chair was skewed to one side, his legs were crossed, and one arm was resting on the back of his chair. Did you call a doctor, Sheriff? Anybody call a doctor? Asked Atticus. No, sir, said Mr. Tate. You didn't call a doctor? No, sir, repeated Mr. Tate. Why not? There was an edge to Atticus's voice. Well, I can tell you why I didn't. It wasn't necessary, Mr. Finch. She was mighty banged up. Something sure happened. It was obvious. But you didn't call a doctor. While you were there, did anyone send for one, fetch one, carry her to one? No, sir. Judge Taylor broke in. He's answered the question 3 times, Atticus. He didn't call a doctor. Atticus said, I just wanted to make sure, Judge. And the judge smiled. Now, Jim's hand was resting on the balcony rail and tightened around it. He drew in his breath suddenly. Glancing below, I saw no corresponding reaction, and I wondered if Jim was trying to be dramatic. Jill was watching peacefully, and so was Reverend Sykes beside him. What is it? I whispered, and I got a terse, shh. Sheriff, Atticus was saying, you say she was mighty banged up. What way? Well, just describe her injuries, Heck. Well, she was beaten around the head. There was already bruises coming on her arms, and it happened about 30 minutes before. How do you know? Mr. Tate grinned. Sorry, that's what they said. Anyway, she was pretty bruised up when I got there, and she had a black eye coming. Which eye? Mr. Tate blinked, and he ran his hands through his hair. Well, let's see, he said softly, and then he looked at Atticus as if he considered the question childish. Can't you remember? Atticus asked. Mr. Tate pointed to an invisible person 5 inches in front of him and said, her left. Now, wait a minute, Sheriff, said Atticus. Was it her left facing you or her left looking the same way you were? Mr. Tate said, yes, that would make it her right. It was her right eye, Mr. Finch. I remember now, she was bunged up on the side of her face. Mr. Tate blinked again, as if something suddenly had been made plain to him. Then he turned his head and he looked around at Tom Robinson, and as if by instinct, Tom Robinson raised his head. Something had been made plain to Atticus also, and it brought him to his feet. Sheriff, please repeat what you just said. It was her right eye, I said. No. Atticus walked to the court reporter's desk and bent down to the furiously scribbling hand. It stopped, flipped back the shorthand pad, and the court reporter said, Mr. Finch, I remembered she was bunged up on that side of the face. Atticus looked up at Mr. Tate. Which side again, Heck? The right side, Mr. Finch, but she had more bruises. You want to hear about them? Atticus seemed to be bordering on another question, but he thought better of it and said, yes. What were her other injuries? And as Mr. Tate answered, Atticus turned and looked at Tom Robinson as if to say this was something they hadn't bargained for. Well, her arms was bruised and she showed me her neck, and there were definite finger marks on her gullet, all around her throat, at the back of her neck. I'd say they were all around, Mr. Finch. You would? Yes, sir. She had a small throat. Anybody could have reached around it. Just answer the question, no or yes, please, Sheriff, said Atticus dryly. And Mr. Tate fell silent. Atticus sat down and he nodded to the circuit solicitor, who shook his head at the judge, who nodded to Mr. Tate, who rose stiffly and stepped down from the witness stand. Okay, so let's take our trial booklets. Okay, so let's write down the facts. Okay, so let's go back and let's look for those facts. Okay, the very first fact that we could put down, okay, was that he was fetched by whom? Who called him? Who went and got him? Bobby Ewell. So a fact established is that Bob Ewell, okay, and got him and went on what date? Okay, November 21st. So put that in under fact 1. Bobby Ewell contacted Heck Tate, okay, on November 21st. Okay. And we don't want to hear the hearsay. We'll hear Bob's testimony. We want to know exactly what Heck saw. Okay. So then on mine, it's 190. It's not the same for you. It says he found her lying on the floor in the middle of the front room, pretty well beat up. Okay. So that would be our fact number 2. Found Mayella on the floor of the living room, pretty beat up. And in that same area, fact 2, he even says that had her wash her face in a bucket. Okay. So he had her wash her face, and he asked her who did it. Okay. Everybody with me? So there's 2 facts. First one is Bob Ewell contacted him on November 21st. Okay. Something had happened to his daughter. Number 2, found Mayella on the floor of the living room, pretty beat up, washed her face, asked her who done it. There's our second fact. Okay. And her response was, okay, third fact, she said it was Tom Robinson. So our third fact is she accused Tom Robinson, and Heck brought him in, arrested her. That's under our third. Okay. Now, also under our third, he brought in Tom Robinson. Did he call a doctor? No. He did not call a doctor. If someone has been beat up and raped, even in this time period, you're going to get a doctor. No doctor. Well, isn't that interesting? We'll get to that. Okay. So under fact 3 with Tom Robinson, that Heck brought in Tom Robinson, also put he did not call in a doctor. Okay. Did not call a doctor, which is odd. She's been raped and beat up. Okay. Now, under our fourth fact for Heck, okay, we want to put what he describes as the wounds. First of all, he said that there were marks on her neck, not partially on her neck, all the way around her neck. So under 4, Stella Ann, under 4, boo, you got to get down. Under 4, you need to write there were finger marks all around her neck. Okay. And not only that, Heck said there was a black eye coming in. And Atticus wanted to make sure we had the correct eye. Okay. So first he says, hi, Stella. First he says, I know you want to be in on everything, boo. Get your paw down. Ugh. Girlfriend. No. Why do you torment me? You're like my peeps. I know. Tweety, I know. Okay. You're just tormenting me. He says, I'm looking for the direct words. Her left eye. He says it's her left eye. But then Atticus says left eye facing you, or her left looking the same way. And he changes what he says, and he says it was her right eye. So he had to think about it, looking at it, okay, putting it into perspective. So her right eye is blackened. So we need to put that under number 4 fact as well. Okay, right eye black. Okay, also the right side of her face. She's bruising the whole right side of her face. Okay, so Fact number 1, Heck says Bob Ewell contacted him November 21st, stating his daughter had been beat up and raped. Number 2, Heck says, found her on the floor in the living room, which is funny because, okay, the front room, we'll talk about why that's odd and strange. Found her on the floor of the front room, pretty beat up. Also in number 2, he washed her face and he asked her who did it. So that goes under number 2. Fact number 3, he asks who did it, and Mayella says Tom Robinson, and Heck goes, arrests him, brings him in. Okay. Also under number 3, didn't call a doctor. Did not call a doctor for help. Oh, we don't need to call a doctor. She's okay. She's been raped and beat up. Yeah. Number 4, finger marks all the way around her neck. All the way around her neck, and her right eye and her right side of her face are all a mess. Okay? Everybody got that? Okay. So everybody's with me so far. So now let's talk about what these facts imply. So on the right-hand side, we have what the facts imply. Well, we know the facts imply that Mayella was raped by Tom Robinson, according to Bobby Ewell, on November 21st. Pretty straightforward. We can imply that Mayella was hurt on November 1st, the 21st of November. Okay? Now, the implications of 2, 3, and 4. What can we imply? Okay, she's been found on the floor in the front room, pretty beat up. Heck had her wash her face, got her up, asked her who done it. Tom Robinson was the one who was accused. Heck brought him in, arrested him, did not call a doctor, and there are finger marks. So what can we imply? We can imply that Tom has been the one accused. Okay, that's the first thing. Tom Robinson has been accused. I'll agree. Okay. Can we imply that Mayella has been hurt? Even though a doctor didn't see her, we can imply that she's been beat up. Okay. And we can imply that, well, we can't imply she's been raped because no doctor was called. But we can imply that she was beat up. Okay. Mayella was beat. And from what Mayella says, we can imply that Tom Robinson is the accused, alleged rapist, alleged, it has not been solidified. He has been accused of rape, okay? All right, does that make sense? Hope so. All right, so there's Heck Tate's testimony. You should have that in the book. If not, you can go back to this recording and you can write those things in. They will help your brain solidify, organize that information. Capiche? Capiche? Yeah, I know. You want in on it. There you go. You can lay with me. All right. So, here we go. Next testimony. Below us, heads turned and feet scraped the floor, babies shifted to shoulders, and a few children scampered out of the courtroom. The Negroes behind us whispered softly among themselves. Dale was asking Reverend Sachs what it was all about, but Reverend Sachs said he didn't know. So far, things were utterly dull. Nobody had thundered. There were no arguments between opposing counsel. There was no drama. A grave disappointment to all present, it seemed. Atticus was proceeding amiably. Amiably means friendly, socially, okay? As if he were involved in a title dispute. Now, with his infinite capacity for calming turbulent seas, he could make a red face as dry as a sermon. Gone was the terror in my mind of stale whiskey and barnyard smells and sleepy-eyed, sullen men, of a husky voice calling in the night, "Mr. Finch, they gone?" Our nightmare had gone with the daylight into a purposeful, half green. It had been gone with the daylight. Everything would come out all right. Now, all the spectators were as relaxed as Judge Taylor, except Jim. His mouth was twisted into a purposeful half grin and his eyes happy about, and he said something about corroborating evidence, which made me sure he was showing off. Robert E. Lee Ewell. Now, in answer to the clerk's booming voice, a little bantam cock of a man rose and strutted to the stand, the back of his neck reddening at the sound of his name. He turned around to take the oath, and we saw that his face was as red as his neck. We also saw no resemblance to his namesake. A shock of wispy, new-washed hair stood up from his forehead. His nose was thin, pointed, and shiny. He had no chin to speak of, and it seemed to be part of his crepey neck. "So help me God," he crowed. Every town the size of Macomb had families like the Ewells. No economic fluctuations changed their status. People like the Ewells lived as guests of the county in prosperity as well as in the depths of a depression. No truant officers could keep their numerous offspring in school. No public health officer could free them from congenital defects, various worms, and the diseases indigenous to filthy surroundings. Now, the Macombs, Ewells, lived behind the town garbage dump in what was once a Negro cabin. The cabin's plank walls were supplemented with sheets of corrugated iron, its roof shingled with tin cans, hammered flat, so only its general shape suggested its original design. Square, with 4 tiny rooms opening into a shotgun hall, which we talked about. The cabin rested uneasily upon 4 irregular stumps of limestone. Its windows were merely open spaces in the walls, no glass, no window frame, which in the summertime were covered with Macombs dump a thorough gleamin' every day. And the fruits of their industry, those that were not eaten, made the plot of ground around the cabin look like the playhouse of an insane child. For a fence was bits of tree limbs, broomsticks, and tool shafts, all tipped with rusty hammerheads, snaggletooth rake heads, shovels, axes, and grubbing hoes, held on with pieces of barbed wire. And enclosed by this barricade was a dirty yard containing the remains of a Model T Ford on blocks, a discarded dentist chair, an ancient icebox, plus lesser items, old shoes, worn out table radios, picture frames, and fruit jars, under which scrawny orange chickens pecked hopefully. One corner of the yard, though, bewildered Macomb. Against the fence, in a line, were 6 chipped enamel slop jars holding brilliant red geraniums, cared for as tenderly as if they belonged to Miss Maudie Atkinson. Had Miss Maudie deigned to permit a geranium on her premises. People said they were Mayella Ewells. Why in this godforsaken house, why would she have red geraniums planted? It's some symbolism, which we're going to talk about as the story goes. On the surface, it looks like Mayella trying to have some beauty in a place of despair, a place of ugliness. So these kids, dad's an alcoholic and a mess, hot mess. These kids, which we'll talk about in a minute, go to the dump every day. That's where they get their food. Lucky that they're not riddled with disease. Okay. Nobody was quite sure how many children were on the place. Some people said 6, others said 9. But there were always several dirty faced ones at the windows when anybody passed by. Nobody had occasion to pass by except at Christmas, when the churches delivered baskets and when the mayor of Macomb asked us to please help the garbage collector by dumping our own trees and trash. A 4-room, little house cabin, 6 to 9 children, and Mr. Ewell. No mother. She's been gone a long time. Atticus took us with him last Christmas when he complied with the mayor's request. A dirt road ran from the highway past the dump down to a small Negro settlement, some 500 yards beyond the Ewells, and it was necessary either to back out of the highway or go the full length of the road and turn around. And most people turned around in the Negroes' front yards. In the frosty December dusk, their cabins looked neat and snug, with pale blue smoke rising from the chimneys and doorways glowing amber from the fires inside. There were delicious smells about. Chicken and bacon frying crisp as the twilight air. Jem and I detected squirrel cooking, but it took an old countryman like Atticus to identify possum and rabbit, aromas that vanished when we rode back past the Ewell residence. So, beyond the dump, you go down the road and you hit the Ewell cabin, and right behind that cabin is the dump. And you follow that road down a ways, and you have the African American settlement, their cabins, just like a little community. The difference is that our African Americans that are thought so poorly of, they live in their cabins, and you can smell food cooking. They take care of what they have. Things are clean. Not the Ewells. Not even close. You can't even compare the two. Okay. All the little man on the witness stand had that made him any better than his nearest neighbor was that if scrubbed with lye soap in very hot water, his skin was white. Mr. Robert Ewell, asked Mr. Gilmer. That's my name, Captain, said the witness. Mr. Gilmer's back stiffened a little, and I felt sorry for him. Perhaps I better explain something now. I've heard that lawyers' children, on seeing their parents in court in the heat of an argument, get the wrong idea. They think that opposing counsel to be the personal enemies of their parents, that they suffer agonies and are surprised to see them often go out arm in arm with their tormentors during the first recess. Well, that wasn't true, Jim. We acquired no traumas from watching our father win or lose. I'm sorry that I can't provide any drama in this respect. If I did it wouldn't be true. We could tell, however, when debate became more acrimonious than professional, this was from watching lawyers other than our father. I never heard Atticus raise his voice in my life, except to a deaf witness. Now, Mr. Gilmer was doing his job, as Atticus was doing his. And besides, Mr. Ewell was Mr. Gilmer's witness, and he had no business being rude to him, all people. Are you the father of Mayella Ewell? Was the next question. Well, if I ain't, I can't do nothing about it now. Her ma's dead, was the answer. Judge Taylor stirred. He turned slowly in his swivel chair and he looked benignly at the witness. Are you the father of Mayella Ewell? He asked in a way that made the laughter below us stop suddenly. Yes, sir, said Mr. Ewell said meekly. Judge Taylor went on in tones of goodwill. This is the first time you ever been in court? I don't recall ever seeing you here. At the witness's affirmative nod, he continued, well, let's get something straight. There will be no more audibly obscene speculations on any subject from anybody in this courtroom as long as I'm sitting here. Do you understand? Mr. Ewell nodded, but I don't think he did. Judge Taylor sighed and said, all right, Mr. Gilmer. Thank you, sir. Now, Mr. Ewell, would you tell us in your own words what happened in the evening of November 21st, please? Well, Jem grinned and he pushed his hair back. Just in your own words, was Mr. Gilmer's. The night of November 21, I was coming in from the woods with a load of kindling, and I just got to the fence and I heard Mayella screaming like a stuck hog in the house. Here, Judge Taylor glanced sharply at the witness and must have decided his speculations devoid of evil intent, for he subsided sleepily. What time was that, Mr. Ewell? Just before sundown. Well, I was saying Mayella was screaming to beat Jesus. Another glance from the bench silenced Mr. Ewell. Yes, she was screaming, said Mr. Gilmer. Mr. Ewell looked confusedly at the judge. Well, Mayella was raising this holy racket, so I dropped my load and I run as fast as I could. But I ran into the fence, and when I got distangled, I run up to the window and I seen. Mr. Ewell's face grew scarlet. He stood up and he pointed his finger at Tom Robinson. I seen that black nigger yonder rutting on my Mayella. So serene was Judge Taylor's court that he had few occasions to use his gavel, but he hammered fully 5 minutes. Atticus was on his feet at the bench saying something to him. Mr. Hectate, at first as the first officer of the county, stood in the middle aisle, quelling the packed courtroom. Behind us, there were angry, muffled groan from the colored people. Reverend Sykes leaned across Dill and me, and he pulled at Jem's elbow. Mr. Jem, he said, you better take Miss Jean Louise home. Mr. Jem, you hear me? Jem turned his head. Scout, go home. Dill, you and Scout, go home. You gotta make me first, I said, remembering Atticus's blessed dictum. Jem scowled furiously at me and then said to Reverend Sykes, I think it's okay, Reverend. She don't understand it. I was mortally offended. I most certainly do. I can understand anything you can. Oh, hush. She doesn't understand it, Reverend. She ain't 9 yet. Reverend Sykes's black eyes were anxious. Mr. Finch know you all are here? This ain't fit for Miss Jean Louise or you boys either. Jim shook his head. He can't see us far away. It's all right, Reverend. Well, I knew Jim would win because I knew nothing would make him leave now. Dill and I were safe for a while. Atticus could see us where he was if he looked. Now, as Judge Taylor banged his gavel, Mr. Ewell was sitting smugly in the witness chair surveying his handiwork. With one phrase, he had turned happy picnickers into sulky, tense, murmuring crowd, being slowly hypnotized by gavel taps, lessening in intensity until the only sound in the courtroom was a dim pink, pink, pink. Judge might have been rapping the bench with a pencil. In possession of his court, once more, Judge Taylor leaned back in his chair, and he looked weary, suddenly weary. His age was showing, and I thought about what Atticus had said. He and Mrs. Taylor didn't kiss much. He must have been nearly 70. There has been a request, Judge Taylor said, that this courtroom be cleared of spectators, or at least women and children. A request that will be denied for the time being. People generally see what they look for and hear what they listen for, and they have the right to subject their children to it. But I can assure you of one thing: you will receive what you see and hear in silence, or you will leave this courtroom. But you won't leave it until the whole boiling of you come before me on contempt charges. Mr. Ewell, you will keep your testimony within the confines of Christian English usage, if that's possible. Proceed, Mr. Gilmer. Mr. Ewell reminded me of a deaf mute. I was sure he had never heard the words that Judge Taylor directed at him. His mouth struggled silently with them, but their import registered on his face. Smugness faded from it, replaced by a dogged earnestness that fooled Judge Taylor not at all. And as long as Mr. Ewell was on the stand, the judge kept his eyes on him as if daring him to make a false move. Now, Mr. Gilmer and Atticus exchanged glances. Atticus was sitting down again, his fist rested on his cheek, and we could not see his face. Mr. Gilmer looked rather desperate. A question from Judge Taylor made him relax. Mr. Ewell, did you see the defendant having sexual intercourse with your daughter? Yes, I did. The spectators were quiet, but the defendant said something. Atticus whispered to him, and Tom Robinson was silent. You say you were at the window? Asked Mr. Gilmer. Yes, sir. How far is it from the ground? About 3 foot. Did you have a clear view of the room? Yes, sir. How did the room look? Well, it was slung about like there was a fight. What did you do when you saw the defendant? Well, I run around the house to get him, but he run out the front door just ahead of me. And I saw who he was, all right. I was too distracted about my Ella to run after him. I run in the house and he lying on the floor squalling. Then what did you do? Well, I ran for Tate quick as I could. I knowed who it was. I lived down there yonder in that nigger nest, past the house every day. Judge, I've asked this county for 15 years to clean out that nest down yonder. They're dangerous to live around, besides devaluing my property. What's the irony of what he's saying? Whose property is devaluing whom's? And he wants that nest to be cleared out, that clean, comfortable community who minds their own business, they're helpful, their community remembers, they reciprocate. He wants them cleaned out. Interesting. Thank you, Mr. Ewell, said Mr. Gilmer hurriedly. Now the witness made a hasty descent from the stand, and he ran smack into Atticus, who had risen to question him, and Judge Taylor permitted the court to laugh. Just a minute, sir, said Atticus genially. Could I ask you a question or two? Mr. Ewell backed up into the witness chair, settled himself, and regarded Atticus with haughty suspicion, an expression common to Macomb County witnesses when confronted by opposing counsel. Mr. Ewell, Atticus began, folks have been doing a lot of running that night. Let's see. You say you ran into the house. You ran to the window. You ran inside. You ran to Mayella. You ran for Mr. Tate. Did you, during all this running, run for a doctor? There wasn't no need to. I seen what happened. But there's one thing I don't understand, said Atticus. Weren't you concerned with Mayella's condition? I most positively was, said Mr. Ewell. I seen who done it. No. I mean her physical condition. Did you not think the nature of her injuries warranted immediate medical attention? What? Didn't you think she should have had a doctor immediately? The witness said he'd never thought about it. He'd never called a doctor to any of his in his life, and it would have cost him $5. That all? He asked. Not quite, said Atticus casually. Mr. Ewell, you heard the sheriff's testimony, didn't you? How'd that? You were in the courtroom when Mr. Hectate was on the stand, weren't you? You heard everything he said, didn't you? Mr. Ewell considered the matter carefully, and he seemed to decide that the question was safe. Yeah, he said. Do you agree with his description of Mayella's injuries? How that? Atticus looked around at Mr. Gilmer and smiled. Mr. Ewell seemed determined not to give the defense the time of day. Well, Mr. Tate testified that her right eye was blackened and she was beaten. Hiya, said the witness. Oh, I hold with everything Tate said. You do? Asked Atticus mildly. I just want to make sure. He went to the court reporter, said something, and the reporter entertained us for some minutes by reading Mr. Tate's testimony of it as if it were the stock market quotations. Which eye, her left? Oh, yes, that would make it her right. It was her right eye. Mr. Finch, I remember now, she was bunged. He flipped the page. Up on that side of the face, Mr. Sheriff, please repeat what you said. It was her right eye, I said. Thank you, Bert, said Atticus. Now you heard it again, Mr. Ewell. Do you have anything to add to it? Do you agree with the sheriff? Oh, with Tate. Her eye was black. She was mighty beat up. The little man seemed to have forgotten his previous humiliation from the bench. It was becoming evident he thought Atticus was an easy match. He seemed to grow ruddy again. His chest swelled, and once more he was a red little rooster. I thought he might burst his shirt at Atticus' next question. Mr. Ewell, can you read and write? Mr. Gilmer interrupted. Objection, he said. Can't see what witness's literacy has to do with the case. Irrelevant and immaterial. Judge Taylor was about to speak, but Atticus said, Judge, if you'll allow the question plus another one, you'll soon see. All right, let's see, said Judge Taylor. But make sure we see, Atticus. Overruled. Mr. Gilmer seemed as curious as the rest of us as to what bearing the state of Mr. Ewell's education had on the case. I'll repeat the question, said Atticus. Can you read and write? I most positively can. Will you write your name and show us? I most positively will. How do you think I signed my relief checks? Mr. Ewell was endearing himself to his fellow citizens. The whispers and chuckles below us probably had to do with what a card he was. Now I was becoming nervous. Atticus seemed to know what he was doing, but it seemed to me that he'd gone frog sticking without a light. Never, never, never. On cross-examination, ask a witness a question you don't already know the answer to. That was a tenet I absorbed with my baby food. Do it, and you'll often get an answer you don't want, an answer that might wreck your case. Okay, so let's talk a moment, and then let's do our Bob Ewell facts. Bob Ewell just said that he's never contacted a doctor in his life. Would cost him money. His wife's dead. How many children are out there on that farm? Mayell is the oldest. Let it sink in. If no doctor's been out there, how have those babies been born, and who's the mother of these babies? Yep. And in doing so, what has Bob Ewell been doing to his daughter? It does not come straight out and say that it is for you, it is implied, it is for you to infer. the abuse that is going on out there. Those red geraniums. Her world, since she was a child, a wee one, is a mess and has been a mess. Let that just sink in. There is more going on here. And people know it. People know it. But remember, we don't have a social services. We've got, now with the depression, we've got relief checks so people can get food. Okay? But there's no social service. There's nobody, there's no department that can go and rescue children or look in on them or do anything like that. So they're eating from the dump. Somebody's perpetuating babies living in this shack. And Bobby Well is saying that the nest down yonder, those vipers, yeah. So when Atticus talks about trash, trash doesn't have a color. Trash doesn't have an economic status. Trash is exactly the way we defined it in class. The way Atticus said, there's no reciprocation, there is no humanity involved. Nobody, it's a mess. It's a mess. And here's the thing, guys. It's in every community around the world. Nobody is free from it. You will always. Okay. So let's look at the facts of Bobby Well. Okay. Here we go. Facts of Bobby Well. You're hanging in good. This is a long chapter, I know. Okay. And you can take it in chunks. All right. So our first fact is he holds to everything that Sheriff Heck Tate has said. Fact number one, he agrees with every single thing that Heck Tate says. Okay? So write that in one. He agrees with all that Sheriff Tate says. Okay? Fact number two, he didn't get a doctor and he's never contacted a doctor in his life. Fact two, didn't call the doctor and never has. Okay? Fact three, he says he saw Tom Robinson actively having sex with Mayella. That's our fact three. Okay. Now we have another fact here that we're going to put under two with not calling the doctor. Okay. So fact number one agrees with everything that Sheriff Tate said in his testimony. Two, didn't call a doctor, nor has he ever. Okay. Three, he says he actively saw Tom having sex with Mayella. Looked through the window, saw her having sex. It's Tom having sex with Mayella. Okay. Now, let's not worry about implication yet because we're not done. Okay. So Atticus has asked him if he can read and write. We're going to see where this takes us. Okay. Sorry, I missed my page. Sorry, my page just got turned. All right. I'll repeat the question, said Atticus. Can you read and write? I most positively can. Will you write your name and show us? I most positively will. How do you think I signed for my relief checks? Well, Mr. Ewell was endearing himself to his fellow citizens, and the whispers and chuckles below us probably had to do with the card. Okay? I was becoming nervous. Atticus seemed to know what he was doing, but it seemed to me he'd gone frog sticking without a leg. Never, never, never on cross examination ask a witness a question you don't already know the answer to. So he probably knows the answer to this already. A tenant that I absorb with my baby food. Do it, and you'll often get an answer you don't want, an answer that might wreck your case. Well, Atticus was reaching into the inside of his pocket of his coat. He drew out an envelope, reached into his vest pocket, and unclipped his fountain pen. He moved leisurely and had turned so that he was in full view of the jury. He unscrewed the fountain pen cap and he placed it gently on the table. He shook the pen a little, then handed it with the envelope to the witness. Could you write your name for us? He asked. Clearly now, so the jury can see you can do it. Now, Mr. Ewell wrote on the back of the envelope and he looked up complacently to see Judge Taylor staring at him as if he were some fragrant gardenia in full bloom on the witness stand, to see Mr. Gilmer half sitting, half standing at his table. The jury was watching him. One man was leaning forward with his hands over the railing. What's so interesting? He asked. You're left-handed, Mr. Ewell, said Judge Taylor. Mr. Ewell turned angrily to the judge and he said he didn't see what being left-handed had to do with it, that he was a Christ-fearing man. And Atticus Finch was taking advantage of him. Tricking lawyers like Atticus Finch took advantage of him all the time with their tricking ways. He told them what had happened. He'd say it again and again, which he did. Nothing Atticus asked him after that shook his story, that he looked through the window, he ran the nigger off, and he ran for the sheriff. Atticus finally dismissed him. Mr. Gilmer asked him one more question. About your writing with your left hand, are you ambidextrous, Mr. Ewell? All right, guys, what's ambidextrous mean? Look it up if you do not know what it means. Look it up. Okay? Wants to know if he can write with both hands. Ambidextrous. Everybody has a stronger hand, be it a left hand, if you're a lefty or a righty. Some are ambidextrous. I can try it, but it looks like a hot mess. Okay? So, Mr. Gilmer asks Bob if he's ambidextrous. Do you think Bob knows what that word means? He can barely fight his way out of a wet paper bag. Okay? I am most positively am not. I can use one hand good as the other. One hand good as the other. What? No, I'm not ambidextrous, but I can use one hand as good as the other. He doesn't know what that means. He's digging himself a hole. So we need to put in our facts under fact number 2. Bob is left-handed. What side of the face is Mayella beat on? You got it. So under fact 2, we have that Bob didn't call for a doctor. We also need to put in there he is left-handed. Okay, so jot that down under fact number 2. Bob is left-handed. So what we have for Bob's testimony, he agrees with every single thing that Sheriff Tate said under oath. He didn't call a doctor. He's never called a doctor. He would never call a doctor. And under number 2, Bobby was left-handed. And under 3, he definitively states with his own eyes he saw Tom having sex with Mayella. Okay? All right, so we've got those down. So hang tight to that. Let's finish the chapter. Okay? I most positively am not. I can use one hand good as the other. One hand as good as the other, he added, glaring at the defense table. Jim seemed to be having a quiet fit. He was pounding the balcony rails softly, and once he whispered, "Got him." I didn't think so. Atticus was trying to show, it seemed to me, that Mr. Ewell could have beaten up Mayella. Well, that much I could follow. And if her right eye was black and she was beaten mostly on the right side of the face, it would tend to show that a left-handed person did it. Well, Sherlock Holmes and Jim Finch could agree, but Tom Robinson could easily be left-handed too. Like Het Tate, I imagined a person facing me, went through a swift mental pantomime, and I concluded that he might have held her with his right hand and pounded her with his left. I looked down at him. His back was to us, but I could see his broad shoulders and his bull thick neck. He could easily have done it. I thought Jem was counting his chickens. What does that mean, counting your chickens? Counting your chickens before they hatch. Getting your hopes up before the reality of it really, really occurs. Okay? So that's the end of our chapter 17. So now let's go back to our trial book, guys. Let me stick my pages in. Okay? What the facts imply. He agrees with everything that Het Tate says. Implies he doesn't really know. He really doesn't have a firm leg to stand on. So he's going to go with what the sheriff says, thinking that his butt's covered. Okay? 2 and 3, what is implied? Didn't call a doctor, never has. Bob left-handed. And he saw him having sex with Mayella. So what can we imply from that? Yes, we can imply that Bob may have beat up his own child. And knowing that there's a probability of incest in the family, that we can also imply there is far more than a black eye and a cheek that has occurred to Mayella. Think about those red geraniums. Something beautiful in the midst of all this destruction. Something kind and good that came into the world and is being destroyed by everything around it. It's a sad, sad state of affairs. Okay? Think about that. Now, before we sign off, I want to make sure everybody's doing okay. I miss you guys. Be safe. Keep reading. These are 2 long chapters, so you can take them in chunks. That's why I put it on YouTube. So then you've got it for us. Okay. Once we get done with the trial, I'd like us to get on my Zoom virtual classroom, and then we can discuss the trial and all the goodness, yuckiness that's been occurring with the story. Okay. So, Stella. So, don't feel overwhelmed. Take things in chunks. Work through it. Think through it. Take care of yourselves. Keep yourself safe. I do miss my babies. I got Stella. I got Dan. But I miss my babies. And if you need anything, you have questions, email me, put it on the remind. You can call, you can text me. Okay? I don't care. I'll do whatever you need me to do. Okay? So we're going to end it here. I love you to the moon and back. Keep safe, and I will see you next week, and I will post more. Capiche? Capache. I love you guys. Bye.